players have reported a spike in hackers in recent weeks, and many of you told me your own experiences in the comments section of one of my last videos. And you're not alone. Console players are apparently deactivating one of Modern Warfare's biggest selling points. That, of course, is crossplay, in an effort to avoid these hackers. This move doesn't even help players who want to compete in Warzone, as crossplay must be enabled in order to access the mode. And that is a huge problem for the developers, as the Battle Royale mode and its more casual sibling Plunder are driving significant sales of cosmetics and Modern Warfare's core multiplayer experience. To this end, Activision and Infinity Ward are rolling out some pretty stringent anti-cheat measures this week, including an absolutely brilliant one that might surprise you. So, in addition to dedicated security updates and additional back-end tech, studio, and enforcement team support, developers are sending a big FU to suspected cheaters. And you might be wondering exactly what that is. Well, get ready for it. Activision and Infinity Ward say they will start matching suspected cheaters together in the same game. Now, this isn't the first time such measures have been employed. Warzone competitor Apex Legends also matches cheaters with other cheaters. But just imagine for a moment an entire 150-player Warzone match filled entirely with cheaters. It would be absolutely bonkers, and hopefully exactly the gut kick that some hackers need. Now, Activision has reportedly already banned over 70,000 cheaters as of April 13th. But that's kind of the beauty of this. These cheaters, these players, they aren't banned. They're just simply stuck in another room with 149 other players who have an affinity for wall hacks and aimbots. As another ginger once said, when everyone's super, no one will be. Cheaters love to win at any cost and don't really care if they ruin someone else's fun. So what's the solution? Take the fun out of the equation, and hopefully they'll eventually stop or drop the game completely. If not, developers can still ban them. And starting this week, players in Warzone and Modern Warfare who report suspected cheaters will receive confirmation in-game if a suspected player is banned. And that's got to make you feel really, really good to know that you actually went out and reported somebody who was potentially cheating. They turned out to be, and they got what was coming to them. Developers also have plans to roll out a new report a player tool for the kill cam and spectator modes at some point in the future in order to make reporting cheaters easier and speeding up the process. Personally, I think this is a fantastic idea. If you think so too, make sure to leave a like on the video. There's an opportunity to teach cheaters a lesson here and give them a taste of what it's like to have your fun ruined. And I am here for that. However, I do also think there is some potential for that tool to be abused. Not much is known about this new system Infinity Ward is giving a green light. It might be possible to grief legitimate players by spamming reports. There's also the chance the enforcement teams or anti-cheat software could issue unfair bans. Hopefully we'll hear more details on how such determinations are made.
Yeah.
Activision has remained tight-lipped in the past about how it handles bans. This also wouldn't be the first time false bans have happened. Last year, and former Fnatic esports player was Call of Duty Black Ops 4.
Alright, I'll be right back. After these messages. I'll be right back. That took a little longer than expected. While I was downstairs, I heard the washer cycle stop, so I just went ahead and changed out the laundry.
For a while, we both struggled with low credit scores. Then, I heard about Self. It's a new way to build credit that doesn't require a credit score or upfront deposit.
Jim in California, and you just want to discuss the existence of God.
It's pretty fucking warm up in here right now, yo. Earlier today it was cold. I had on both heaters. I had to turn the baseboard heat on and the space heater on, and it was like chilly this morning. Now I came up here with a short sleeve shirt on. As soon as I sat down, I started fucking sweating. Like, wait a minute.
God. And you're on with Tracy and Mandisa. Jim?
All right, hi.
Hey!
All right, so I wanted to talk about the existence of God. And the argument I want that I think is probably the best case for theism is personally the Kalam cosmological argument.
We just got a collective, sort of from the audience. And I think the reason is that that's been addressed like lots and lots. Do you have something new to add about it? Like something that hasn't been rehashed like a million times? Or is this just going to be the same conversation that's been had like a million times?
It's nice.
Well, I mean, it could be the same conversation.
Do you have something new that we haven't heard that's like, hey, I've listened to the show and you've addressed this, but I think you're not understanding a certain aspect of it that I'd like to address? Or is this just going to be, let's talk about Kalam again?
What does this have to do with let's talk about Kalam again?
Okay, why do you want to have this conversation again?
Well, I mean, because I've never heard you guys talk about the Kalam before. But then again, I don't watch you guys usually.
All right, well, let's just talk for, we'll give it a few minutes and just see how it goes. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, the Kalam uses mainly two premises in support of its conclusion.
Yeah, everything, is it everything that begins to exist, has a cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, everything that begins to exist has a cause.
The universe,
and then the cause
existent.
is specially pleaded to not have to need a cause. Is that right?
Well, no, because the cause, the second premise of the Kalam argues for a mentioned beginning, a beginning for time. So whatever caused time would be prior to time itself, making it immutable.
Why is it immutable?
And atemporal.
Why is it immutable? Like, how do you know anything about the time before time?
Well, I never said time before time.
Well, you said that there was a time when time began. Wait, there's a time when time began, right?
No, I said prior to time.
Right, so how is there a prior to time if there's not a time when time began?
Well, the prior I'm talking about here is like the greater than and less than relationship you find in mathematics. It's not a tense fact. Like when I say, for example...
Right, but I mean, what we're basically saying is that there was a point at which our universe began, and that's when we sort of start cataloging time, right?
Slow. What up?
Right?
Well, the Kalam, no.
No?
Kalam offers that an infinite amount of temporal...
No comments are coming through, baby.
We don't know. I don't know. I know nothing about before this universe, right? Like, all I know is that we don't have any way to gauge what occurred or how to assign metrics, or we don't know anything about how to judge what the case was before this universe began. Right? That's what Hawking says in his Beginning of Time lecture, is that we might as well write those things out of the story because we don't have any information about them, and right now there's no way to get information about them, so we can't say anything informed about what was going on before our universe and before time began, so we might as well start from there, right?
Well, but we can argue for certain properties at least.
I don't think we can. I mean, you can argue for them, but you can't test for them, and so you're just simply asserting things, and we have no way to confirm them. Right?
Well, I would disagree there.
Okay, how do we confirm anything you're going to say?
Through logic.
That's not a confirmation. That's a hypothesis, right? So if you start using logic, it's going to probably be based on realities that we're confronted with in this universe. Right? I mean, how would it not be? What else are you going to base it on? Realities that exist somewhere else that we can't have access to?
Well, a priori intuition. I mean, mathematics is something.
I don't.
It sounds more.
I mean, I would think that Hawking understands mathematics, and he's basically said that we can't really gauge those events. Now, there may be somebody in physics working on some aspect of how to gauge those events. I'm not qualified to talk about that, but I just know, like I said, Hawking says you can't really discuss them with any sort of informed way, and I have a feeling he understood math.
Well, you might have understood math, but you may not have understood the ontology of mathematics. That's something more philosophers are.
Right, but this isn't a philosophy question, it's a science question. Right? What existed before this universe is a question for cosmologists. Isn't it? Have you talked to any cosmologists about this? Have you talked to any physicists like astrophysics, or you've written to a university department of astrophysics to see if anybody there is willing to answer questions for you on this? What have they said? Have you talked to anybody with a degree in this that could answer these questions in an informed way? Or did you just call an atheist show?
Besides these ad hom attacks.
I'm not, it's not, when did I attack you? When did I attack you? What did I say that was like an attack or an insult on you? I asked questions and I wasn't jacking off. I was literally saying, like, for example, there's been times I've needed to know things where I had questions about things I was reading or things I didn't understand, and I would reach out to like somebody who was head of a department in a university who dealt with that. One of them was like, I was reading the Icelandic sagas and I had some questions about why they had certain laws. And I didn't just call some weird show. I literally went to somebody who had a degree, who was heading up a department. I said, are you willing to give me a few minutes of your time to talk to me about my questions about this? Because I don't understand it. And they were willing to do it. If they hadn't been, I'd have gone to somebody else. But I'm going to go to somebody who's able to do it. It's like somebody who has questions about evolution calling the show instead of talking to a biologist. Now, if you've talked to a biologist and you want to talk to me about what they told you or whatever, we can have that conversation, but I can't really cross-check biologists. But it's the same with this. I mean, if this is about cosmology, and I'm asking you, have you ever spoken to somebody who actually has a degree in this field that could answer these questions before you called the show? I think that's a fair question.
Right, but the thing is, my arguments in support of an actual infinite or against an actual infinity is more based on metaphysical arguments.
Right, but you need to talk to the people that deal with the actual hard facts about this, because they're the ones that can tell you whether your metaphysical arguments are holding water in reality. They're the ones that study this. Why would you not go and see what the science behind this actually has to say before you would call an atheist show? Why wouldn't you look up the scientific rebuttals to this thing before you would call us to talk about it? Why don't you want to know what actual experts in this field know? This is a science question. It's not a philosophical question. It's a science question. You can philosophize about it all day long, but if you're saying things and they're wrong, I have no way to check them against a reality, because I don't know how to look at the reality of before time. How would I check anything you're saying? How can I go and validate it? How can I verify? What would I hold it up against to look at and say, yes, this is what happened before time? How do I know? How do we know? Even if it feels intuitively good to us, how do we know it's accurate? And even if it matches things that make sense in this universe to us and seems reasonable based on this universe, whatever happened before time began isn't going to conform to the rules and regulations and the requirements of this universe. So we're talking really out of our depth here, I think.
But none of that is against the inference that something that is prior to time is atemporal.
I don't know what would be prior to time. I don't know if there was time prior to time. I don't know what there would be. And if somebody tells me it's a certain way, I don't know. No, I'm not saying that you did. I'm saying I don't know how I would check it. You can say it and we can talk about it, but we're not really going to be able to get anywhere. We're talking about things that are not falsifiable and that would be like intuitively accepted based on knowledge of a universe that has no real relevance to the question. I mean, is this even making sense? Like, do you understand what I'm saying as far as my objection to... I feel bad because it's like, oh, it sounds like I'm saying I don't even want to talk about it, but what I'm trying to do is make you understand that we could talk all day about it and we'll never be able to resolve anything because there's no way to verify anything you're going to say because we don't have access to the information to check it.
Right, but I mean, the objection that you're giving, like time prior to time, doesn't even make coherent sense.
I'm just simply saying that but before time doesn't need to make coherent sense is, I guess, part of my point. Because it doesn't make coherent sense based on our knowledge of this universe doesn't mean that it can't make sense like in whatever would be before time. What I'm saying is that we can't use this universe to make assumptions about that because what happens in this universe is can't be trusted to be how it would work. It would have been so vastly different that there's no way to confirm looking at what makes sense in this universe that our assumptions about something that would be before this universe would make sense.
So, from what I can understand from your objection is that any talk we can make prior to the universe may not make unintelligible sense, and therefore it's useless to posit it?
I'm saying you can posit it if you want, but at the end of the day, it's gonna be back to the beginning. You're not gonna have learned anything. You're just gonna have thought things through based on what you think makes sense. And then at the end of it, if people agree with you, you both think it makes sense and you could both be totally wrong and there's no way to verify it. The question would be whether or not you could get a hold of somebody in the field of physics who is investigating some way of accessing information about whatever was before this universe. That's what you're looking for, and that's that would be a super high-end physics. I mean, that wouldn't be just like your run-of-the-mill, let's get a plastic bottle full of water and put some floaters in it and do some weekend tests with the kids. These are people that are really going to be on the edge of it. And I would recommend, I guess, if this is a field that interests you or if this is something that you're really interested in, that's what I would look for. I have heard that some people are looking into that type of physics, but I'm not a physicist and I don't know that much about it. And I can ask people at the blog if you know of any people that are working on this or physicists who are involved in this, departments at universities that might be involved in it. And don't think I'm being facetious. I have had professors and researchers get back to me on stuff and answer my questions. And I'll be honest with you. There have been a few times people have written back and just told me to go blow myself and that, they have no time for me. So you can get a crappy response from an asshole. But you can also get people who are just like, oh, sure, I love this stuff. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. And I would really recommend getting a hold of a person who has devoted their life to this type of research, and especially somebody that's very interested in whatever would be the cutting edge on how do we try to determine what would happen in, before time, which, if there's people looking into that, that would be the people you probably would want to talk to if you really want to know what is it that we can know about that.
Okay, so if I understand you...
And I forgot the name of the science, but there is like one or two guys that I do listen to who hypothesize about what was prior to what we understand as the beginning of our universe. And that's just the thing. It's like you have to know so much about the fundamental mechanics of matter itself and have a grasp, a more solid grasp than the average person on how time works. And for the motherfuckers who sit back and try to come up with some type of hypothesis of what existed before the Big Bang, I don't want that job. But that's the only thing. It seems like we have been able to understand light well enough where, by using very sophisticated calculations, figuring out how fast light is traveling and how far light has traveled, we can calculate a zero-sum point where, to the best of our indications, it was a origin of what we perceive as photons in light. So this shit started in somewhere at some point and expanded from there. And what was before that? And I kind of feel like that spiritual systems are earlier forms of religious and ceremonial practice were in a way beneficial to mankind, especially starting off trying to build coherent and cohesive civilizations where you had large groups of people living amongst each other, from family units to individual tribal units to small villages and towns. And it's like, the belief in something bigger than ourselves always seems to like bring people together. But then at the same time, it always seems like certain individuals in all these groups claim that divinity for themselves. Just like North Korea, their leader is like a demigod, and motherfucking Alexander the Greek, he was supposed to be like a demigod. And so there's always, even the ancient kings of England, you know what I'm saying? They all felt like they were ruling from a divine source. But there's always this belief in something, in a belief in a creator God. It's always been there, and I think It may always be there. But that's the only thing, like, for real, even though America is like a Christian nation run by the Jews. But and Hollywood is our biggest producer of media and entertainment. But at the same time, when you look at like hardcore sci-fi movies that really try to use technology in a realistic way, especially sci-fi movies that have a futuristic setting. How many movies that predict the future put any emphasis on finding a god? And the two of the major front runners for this whole thing, for like sci-fi futuristic shit, is Star Trek and Star Wars. Now in the Star Wars franchise, that shit's in a galaxy far, far away and all this shit. And they had powers and a force and all this shit, but like, was there a fucking god and a heaven and a hell? And then like Star Trek with Captain Kirk and Captain Picard and all these motherfuckers, and they supposed to be like way in the future and shit. Did these motherfuckers ever find God? Did the rapture ever happen? Did Jesus Christ ever come back like the Bible prophecies say? Like even in our science fiction, when Hollywood predicts the future or tries to create a scenario that may be possible, they don't ever find God in that shit. You know what I'm saying? Lost in space and all that shit. These motherfuckers was, once again, it was way in the future, and they never found God. You know what I'm saying? I don't think it will ever be possible to prove that there is a creator. And I've watched hundreds of sci-fi films. And some of them do have like a type of religious overlay. I can think of all, like, when you look at the Doom series, there's like this cult that's almost like this sect that's almost like a cult or whatever. And it's the same thing, just like a church. That's all church and religion. They're just like little cults and shit. But they do have like things like that. But once again, like nobody really believes that shit. Because if they did, like, somebody would have made a movie about that shit and like what happened afterwards, or like, nobody believes that shit.
Briefly, anything prior to time or anything talking about outside of time doesn't have to make logically coherent sense, but somehow science, as if scientific theories don't need to make coherent sense, will somehow give the explanation.
No, I'm saying that there are who are, I have heard that there are people who are trying to look into ways to be able to understand what may have happened before time. I don't know anything really about it. I'm just saying I've heard that, because there's been times when I've put forward that we don't know anything about it, and other people have said, well, there's these people working on this thing here, and they say that you can look into certain aspects of it. And I don't really know what their scientific theories or their natural philosophy explanations would be for how you can do that. It might be that other scientists are like, hey, I think it's a crock of crap, and I don't agree with what they're doing over here in this research. I don't know. And consensus would be really important, right? So if you did find people that were studying that, and then a huge swath of the rest of the people in the field were just like, yeah, that's a bunch of crap, I wouldn't necessarily lean too hard on it. You might be interested in looking at it because it sounds like something that interests you personally. But at the same time, you'd want to be careful because just because something is high end and very scientific doesn't necessarily mean that other people that are working in that field agree with how that methodology is being executed. Does that make sense? Or not?
I mean, here's the thing. From what I understood, is that you dismiss my claim that the cause of these years can be atemporal based on the sense that...
I'm not dismissing. I'm saying we don't know. I don't know how to check it. If you make a claim about whatever existed or didn't, whatever it was before time, I don't know how to confirm it. And so I don't know what to do with that information.
Well, I mean, there is one way you could do it. I mean, if you could prove, for example, the universe had always existed, then there would be no need to posit for atemporal.
Okay, but as far as I know, the prevailing theories are that there was a beginning to what we consider to be our universe. The only question is what happened before, and as far as I know, that has not been answered. There may be people looking into it, I'm not sure, but if this is an area that interests you, those would be the people that could give you the best information about it. That's where I would suggest you start your research, not in a philosophy book.
Right, especially if you're coming onto this show and perhaps providing some sort of counter for, I guess, or maybe, are you asking this question because you truly do believe in the existence of a God? I'm trying to understand exactly why you called asking about this.
Is this what convinced you that there's a God? Like, did you not believe in God and then you heard Kalam and then you started believing?
Well, yes, actually.
Okay.
And there we go.
And did you check that against people who actually are expert in the field to see if they agreed that it was a reasonable conclusion?
Right, but what I don't see is why are you guys so dismissive on philosophy?
No, I'm dismissive. What I'm trying to do, and I'm doing a bad job of it, is to avoid a conversation that results in nothing fruitful. So what you're basically trying to say is let's have a conversation about this thing that at the end of the day, no matter where it goes, and even if I agree with everything you're saying, we have no way to confirm it. And we're still we don't know. This makes a lot of sense to us, but we don't know if it's true. We don't know what to compare it against.
Right.
What would we compare it against?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the people that would have to confirm it are the people I'm saying that you might want to go and talk to. What good is it to have a lot of information that you can't falsify? I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some people who have fun simply sitting around and talking about stuff and they don't care. I mean, like, for example, these, I forget what they're called, but they're like these thought experiments, I guess, where people are just talking about what if this and what if that and sometimes there's real world implications and sometimes not so much. And they just enjoy, hypotheticals. But at the end of the day, if we're just going to go down Kalam and then, even if I agree with you and said, oh yeah, that's a really interesting hypothesis that, results in a God, at the end of it, how do we confirm that? And then we're back to square one. I don't know. It intuitively, seems right, but I don't know what to do with that information because I can't confirm it. And what I'm saying is it seems to make sense to me that if somebody's like, it's just like if somebody heard creationist arguments, for example, and they were just like, wow, these are really compelling, and they called the show. And my thought would be, did you call biologists first? Did you talk to somebody with a PhD in genetics? Or did you even reach out or try to get a hold of somebody that could answer those questions before you called the show? Because that's who if you really have an interest and you really find it compelling, I would think you would check with people that have devoted their lives to studying it and see if they think that makes sense. Like, why wouldn't you, I guess, is my question. Why wouldn't you do that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think that analogy is comparable. Because, first of all, if we look at, why creationists believe what they do, they operate on the basis that the universe is causally open and that there's an outside force acting on the world.
Not necessarily. You could be a deist creationist, couldn't you? Isn't that what deists are? God started it, and now he's not involved? He's not acting on it? Or it's not acting, I guess.
But that's not an objection at all.
I'm not saying it's an objection to anything. I'm just saying that if somebody was a creationist, or if they believed in, for example, young Earth creationism, I would think that before calling the show, they should at least look into the scientific counter arguments against what it is they're putting forward.
Well, I don't think they make it on the basis of natural law. Natural law operates the universe as a causally.
But the laws within this universe would not be applicable to anything outside the universe. Like, we wouldn't know if they would apply previously or not. There is no way to know that.
My objection is referring to when you mentioned the biological arguments. Right, which is in the universe, so that objection wouldn't work.
No, I'm not. The only objection I'm making, if you want to call it that, is that if you have an interest in a particular topic that has entire fields of research behind it, what would be your objection to actually reaching out to those researchers to ask their views on it? I just don't understand why that's even a problem for me to ask that, or why that wouldn't have been something you'd do if this is really something that interests you.
Well, the thing is, I don't have any problems with that.
Okay, have you done it?
I haven't had any problem with it.
Have you done it?
No.
I mean, isn't it a logical step? Like, if somebody really, really has a big interest in horses and their entire worldview revolves around horses, and I say to them, have you ever gone to talk to somebody who, understands horses? And they're just like, no. I thought I'd call an atheist show about it. It's like, if your whole worldview hinges on this aspect of reality, and there are people who have literally devoted their lives to it for decades, and you haven't even spoken to them, I think that's a fair question for me to be kind of head scratching about. Why not?
Well, because on the basis of metaphysics.
So what? So tell them, hey, on the basis of metaphysics, I think the time before, or not the time before, but whatever was before time, necessitates a God. What do you think? Hawking says no, it doesn't. But there might be other physicists, who have published papers saying that it does. I've not seen them. But these people would be able to tell you if there's any scientific validity, any aspect of measurable reality that aligns with your conclusions, or even your assumptions that lead to those conclusions. Like when you're telling them, wouldn't it be temporal? Well, they can answer you on that. They can say whether we can say that or not. I can't even say that.
And then you can call the show to say what the research that you found as to what they said, and whether or not it either confirms or contradicts anyone on the show would say. But you haven't even done that.
I don't even know that the show would have opinions on it. Right. I mean, it might even be better to post at the blog, because there'd be a lot more people that would have backgrounds in this than people on the show here that really aren't that into physics. I mean, but I do think that if this is an area that interests you and you've got questions about, or you have opinions about whatever was before time, the people to talk to would be the people that are saying, here's when time started and here's what we can or can't say about that. Like, that would seem to me the first people that I would reach out to if I was starting to have ideas on this and I was interested in it. And I don't know what else to add. I mean, if you want to post at the blog about it, you can post at the blog about it, but I would really encourage you to talk to people who spend their lives looking at whatever they would consider evidence for this area of study, and see what they're saying, if this is something that impacts you a lot and that you feel is, that interesting. I mean, can you do that?
Yeah.
Would you be willing to do it?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I would encourage you to do it. It's not, please don't feel bad. I don't mind the call. And I honestly feel like this was a productive discussion, despite the fact that we didn't get into the apologetics. I don't mind the call at all. And I'm sorry that there's I understand your disappointment. But I really think you would do better to talk to people who also are interested in this and who also have researched it and who can kind of help you to cross-check your views on it and either confirm or not. And I'm not sending you there saying they're going to tell you you're full of crap, because I don't know. I've never put it forward to, physicists, hey, what do you think of Kalam? So, I mean, I think it would be interesting for you to reach out to them and just say, look, I'm a believer and I hear this argument, and, what are your thoughts, or what is known, or can you point me to some research? And if somebody writes you back and they're rude about it, then that's just somebody that couldn't be bothered. But don't give up. Go to someone else. I can almost guarantee you that you will, pretty quickly find somebody who's willing to say, hey, here's some information that you might find useful.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the call.
Albert in Florida. You're on the air with Jamie and Matt Dillahunty.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I can.
All right. Hi, Matt. My guest is Jamie.
Yep.
I just had some questions about, I guess this is the first time I call, so excuse me if I'm a little nervous. I just wanted to ask some questions about atheism and the atheist lifestyle.
Okay. I mean, yeah. There's more than one way to live your life when you don't have a God. So there's not one atheist lifestyle. But if you want to ask about my lifestyle or Matt's lifestyle, I'm not sure how much Matt wants to share or whatever, but I'm willing to.
My life's pretty much an open book.
Yeah, I just want to know kind of like, what do you guys believe in? I mean, like, what's the goal of your show? What's the gospel, the message that you guys are preaching or trying to spread? I mean, how is this show going to help humanity? How is atheism going to help humanity? Well,
the thing that's going to help humanity, hello, Anthony? Well, the thing that would, I'm sorry, Albert, my apologies. The thing that would help humanity about having fewer people that believe in a God or that subscribe to religions would be that it would undo the kinds of harm that religion can cause, which, to be clear, is all that the word atheism means.
As an atheist, we just don't believe there's a God. That doesn't tell us anything about how to live. How to live and what things that are going to benefit humanity are skepticism and humanism.
Yeah.
Skepticism being about how you go about figuring out what is believable and what you should believe, and humanism being a moral, ethical view of the world that basically, as far as we can tell, we are stuck here. There's nobody supernatural to intervene on our behalf, and we've got to figure out how best to solve our problems. So while, this show is going to be different from the atheist experience in some senses, but the purpose of it, we don't have something to preach. There's no gospel. We don't believe there's a God, and we find it curious that we live in a world where so many people do, and whenever we ask them to give a justification for it, they fail miserably, which puts us in an even stranger position of being surrounded by people who believe something when they can't give any good reason for believing it. And the beliefs that they have are, in many cases, incredibly detrimental to humanity. They impede progress. They set up divisive positions where it's us versus them. So for me, I've been doing this for almost 14 years, and the purpose is to have the conversations, to get information out to people so that they can see, hey, has anybody in the history of humanity provided a good reason to believe the things that so many people believe? And if the answer is no, then shouldn't we stop believing those things and start working to make the world better without, hitting our knees and folding our hands in prayer? Because when has that ever done anything?
Besides affect the way that people feel, but in serious situations, I'd rather that people feel that those situations were serious and that something needed to be done, rather than just wishing away problems, because, as you just highlighted, that doesn't solve them, right? So the idea that when you have these conversations, we should promote a skeptical viewpoint as far as an approach to forming beliefs, because we'd like people to care whether or not what they believe is true. And when you do that and you examine the way in which you come to conclusions, one of the things that we found is that scientific skepticism is the most reliable method for doing that. If you have another method that's more reliable, we'd love to hear about it. Does that pretty much answer your initial questions, Albert? Or
yeah, that does. How does this? Well, I have more. How does this show, for instance, differ from the other one, the Atheist Experience?
So the format is effectively the same, but we have an emphasis on having conversations with some of the same callers from week to week. So instead of a one-off conversation, which because the Atheist Experience has so many callers and because people call in half an hour before and call, get a busy signal, hang up and call again and get a busy signal, it's more difficult for the series of rotating hosts and co-hosts to have I talked to you last week and I can talk to you this week again, and I'll talk to you the next week as far as, I explained something last week, but you've called in this week and I don't think you understood what I was saying. Call in again and let me help you with it again, sort of helping people get on their feet, which also makes it a better show for recent deconverts and other recent non-believers that need someone to reach out to for I'm a heathen now. How do I do that?
I think there's another aspect of this too, is that, so I've been hosting the Atheist Experience for almost 14 years, and there's now 3 regular hosts, although I'm on less than anybody now, myself, Russell, and Tracy. And then there's 5 co-hosts, and there is a whole bunch of people who would love to be involved in that sort of thing. If you watch the Atheist Experience, there are different styles and different approaches. Don's going to give a presentation on the failings of Christianity.
They just don't stop.
They never stop. But, Tracy has a...
Are you looking for a way to make some extra cash?
They send you a decal and you place it on your vehicle and literally just drive around and they send...
The topic is listed as would like to prove the historicity of Jesus.
You did call in on the right
and
day.
You couldn't have called it a more perfect day.
It's an atheist miracle.
So you're on with Tracy and David, and feel free. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not an expert in textual criticism, but I don't know, where do you want to start off with, the Gospels or outside of the Bible for Jesus' existence?
Well, let me ask you this.
Go for it, David.
I mentioned this in the talk today, is the first thing we should ask ourselves anytime someone wants to tell you, I know what Jesus said or did or how he wants you to vote, you need to say, okay, well, what's our source for that? And then you have to say, how reliable is that source? So I guess that's what I would put to you is, what's your sources for anything you want to make a claim about Jesus? And how reliable are those sources?
Well, for example, if you look at the emperor at the time of Jesus, he has only 10 historical sources in the first, after the 150 years of his life. But when we look at Jesus, we have 42.
Hold on. Stop. Pump the brakes. When you say we have 42, first of all, that number is widely inflated. How many contemporary witnesses do we have to Jesus? How many non-Christian witnesses do we have to Jesus? That's a better question. Because it turns out, of all the lines of evidence that you can use to prop up any historical claim, not even about Jesus, but about anybody, John the Baptist, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, you've got to ask yourself, how many lines of evidence do we have to support this? And when you look at just the ways that you can support a claim, for most of those lines of evidence, Jesus has exactly 0 lines of evidence. And the one that he does have, which it's not the best kind of written evidence. It's not historians citing their sources and giving, critiquing views and weighing the evidence. It's the worst kind. It's anonymous Christian writers falsely passing themselves off as somebody who existed years before them and from some other place, who are writing specifically without sources, claiming to be eyewitnesses, claiming to be talking to eyewitnesses, who are out there writing all this to convert you to Christianity. It's hard that are in a worse shape for Jesus. And that's true whether Jesus was real or not. The fact is, even if there was a Jesus, just weighing the state of the evidence we have for him, it almost doesn't even matter, because everything that we think we know about Jesus comes from sources that have nothing to do with anybody who actually lived in the first century.
Okay, if you want to start with Pontius Pilate, we found his grave.
Pontius Pilate existed.
Correct. He's correct. Now I'll go.
In fact, it's what we know about Pontius Pilate that helps us tell that the stories they're telling about him in the Gospels don't match historical reality, because the Pontius Pilate they paint a picture of is nobody who actually existed. Because we have lots of good sources on Pontius Pilate, and they all disagree with what the Gospels are saying about him.
Well, we'll start with the Gospel of John. You don't believe John the Apostle wrote that?
No, I don't think there was a John the Apostle.
No.
And actually,
Matthew, Mark,
the real
Luke, and
author
John
of that isn't given as John the Apostle. It's given as the beloved disciple, the disciple who Jesus loved.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there's scholars out there who think it's actually the character of Lazarus who's supposed to be the beloved disciple, because that's the only other person in there that it specifically mentions Jesus loving. But it's funny you say let's start with John, because John is actually the last gospel to be written. And he's writing sometime in the early 2nd century. If you wanted to start with a gospel, we should start with the Gospel of Mark, because that was the first gospel that was written. And when it was written sometime right after the war with Rome, around in the 70s of the 1st century. All our biographical information ultimately comes from the 4 Gospels, and all our 4 Gospels ultimately come from that Gospel of Mark.
Well, I disagree with that, because Mark, Luke, and Matthew are considered the synoptic Gospels.
Yeah, but they're just,
you know what that means?
those names are
let's
just...
break that down for our audience, what that means that they're called the synoptic Gospels. Because I think...
Yes, I can explain that.
Please do.
Most of the parables, most of the miracles, most of Jesus' life in Luke, Matthew, and what are we talking about?
Mark.
Those are, like, you got 30 of the same stories in those. Because Mark was written for the Romans, Luke was written for the Greeks, and Matthew was written for the Jews. The reason Matthew was written for the Jews is because it's got most of the Old Testament prophecies in there.
And he also corrects most of Mark's mistakes, whereas Luke tends to repeat them.
But I wanted to talk about something in John that's very specific, that I know that this is an eyewitness testimony.
That you know.
That's funny you say that, because even the Gospel of John says that we know this is true even though we're not eyewitnesses. But go ahead. I think I know where you're going with this.
But do you know what a pleural effusion is?
Let's come back to your synoptic problem first. But no, go ahead and tell us all what pleural infusion is.
Well, in John 19:34, it says, when Jesus was dead, the guy put a spear into his lung, and a bunch of blood and water came out.
Yeah.
Very specific.
And very hard in reality. How would you know if blood and water came out at the same time? Just putting it out there.
Because we can now confirm this with medical evidence.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that medically it can't be done. What I'm saying is, if you were an ancient person poking a hole into somebody and they say blood and water came out, how would an ancient person know that that was happening? Metaphorically and allegorically, it makes a lot of sense for a later writer like John to be saying that that's what happened, because there's metaphorical weight to water and metaphorical weight to blood that he's drawing upon. But anyway, we're talking about a story. You're talking about. I'm not denying that that could happen or possibly happen, but the possibility of that happening isn't what making it true or not, and it's certainly not making it an eyewitness account. And in fact, the fact that it has to go out of its way from later editors to end the story and say, oh, and this was written by an eyewitness, and we know it's true because it says right here. The napkin religion is true because it says right here on the napkin. That's what we get at the end of John. And again, this is being written by somebody in the mid to early 2nd century. It could not have been written by anybody who was alive when Jesus was alive.
I disagree, because the reason why we Protestants don't include the apocryphal books which also give historical evidence for Jesus, is because those were written after 100 AD.
Well, that's not why, but and anyway, I'm failing. You're pointing. It seems the point you're making is that, well, because this thing medically is real, that means this story actually happened, and I'm not sure I follow that at all.
But you're suggesting that if I made up a story, that water came out.
No, not you, but I'm suggesting, yes, it was a story, and we have many lines of evidence that point to this being a story. In fact, we can trace out the evolution of this story. And I said, let's start with Mark, because Mark is the oldest gospel, and we can trace out where Matthew spins off from Mark, where Luke spins off from Mark, where John spins off from them. And we step with each other, quoting word for word in ways that are very unlikely if they were even trying to tell the same story. Because, again, it's word for word, verbatim correspondence. When they're not in lockstep with each other, they're going off in completely incompatible ways. I was just telling Tracy about that, how if you read the details in John's gospel about the last 3 weeks of Jesus' life, and then compare it to any of the synoptic gospels, they don't match up at all. Not even a little bit. They're completely detailed, completely filled in, and they're completely incompatible. And I'm talking about not just after the resurrection, which is they are, but I'm talking about for the final month of Jesus' life, they've got their Jesus doing completely different things in completely different ways for completely different motives.
Well, Mark was written first for the Romans, so...
Well, Mark was written first, full stop. He wrote it for Gentile Christians. He may have written it in Rome. He certainly didn't write it in Judea or the Galilee, because he makes all of these mistakes about everyday life in Judea and basic Judaism that nobody would have made if they were actually the person he was supposed to be in the Bible. Matthew goes and takes his Bible. None of these guys were setting out to write a gospel. They were all setting out to write the gospel. Matthew was just trying to take the only gospel he knew, Mark's, and improve on it, add to it, and correct its mistakes. And where Mark keeps alluding to Old Testament passages, Matthew makes that explicit. Mark expects his more educated readers to understand what he's doing, and that he's telling a story about Jesus, but he's really telling parables taken from Old Testament scriptures. And things that don't make sense historically, they don't make sense from a logical standpoint, they make perfect sense from an allegorical standpoint. And Mark actually goes out of his way to tell us that's what he's doing. Whereas Matthew, as you say, written for the Jews, and I totally agree, he was written for Jewish Christians in a Jewish Christian community. Luke, on the other hand, he was writing for everybody. He wanted to be a big tent writer. He wanted Christianity to include women and children and Gentiles and Pharisees and John the Baptist cult. He wanted to make these all part of the same team, so that when he's writing his gospel, and interesting, when he writes his gospel, he says, you know, there's so many people writing gospels now, it seemed to me a good idea to go back to our sources and check in this story that was handed down to us, which is a lie, because all he does is take the best parts of Matthew and Mark and then spin off from there. He doesn't tell us that's what he's doing. It's very clear from the textual analysis that's exactly what he's doing. And he's also taking things from Josephus. And the reason we know he's taking things from Flavius Josephus is because when we match those up,
Flavian,
the information we get in Josephus is more complete. It's in context.
Trying to be part of the Caesars.
He's clearly just using bits of it for window dressing and not always getting his facts right, which is one of the ways that we know that he's the one stealing from Josephus and not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And John, of course, comes decades later, if not more than that. And again, he's writing at a time when his Jesus is so much different from Mark's Jesus that you can barely think that they were the same character. In Mark's Jesus, he is the most fallible, most human, the most no-frills Jesus. John's Jesus should have been stoned to death for blasphemy 2 minutes out of the gate. There's no reason that they shouldn't have killed him, because he's constantly saying that he's God. He might as well be wearing it on a t-shirt. It's like there was a shortage of rocks around that time. Otherwise, they would have taken him right out as Mosaic law required.
Well, you're suggesting that Mark is not a eyewitness testimony.
No, I'm not suggesting it. I'm saying it outright. There is no way he was an eyewitness. He doesn't claim to be.
Well, I think because in Galatians 2:9, James, Peter, and John are the esteemed pillars of the Christian church.
And let's look at those pillars. What does Paul say about those guys that are the pillars of the church in Galatians?
Can I just say, Mark the evangelist who wrote Mark gets his information from Peter. So
you know, if that was true, then why do the other gospels have more information about Peter than Mark's does?
Because Mark is a basic summary of Jesus' life.
How do you know that? Why would you even say that? What makes you think it's a basic summary of Jesus' life?
First of all, we have 4 different gospels, and they're written for different people to get people to Christ. We don't have just one book.
Why the stories are different, though, bro?
Criticize that anyways.
So you guys tell different stories?
It probably would have something to criticize about it. But the fact is, we didn't have 4 gospels for the longest time.
Yeah,
in fact, we had dozens of gospels, really.
Exactly. But before that, it was just
the
Tanakh.
middle of the 2nd century that anyone thought, you know what? We should put all these letters together and all these gospels together
in a book,
and sort out the ones we like from the ones we don't like, and make a New Testament out of it. And you know where they got that idea? They got that idea from heretics, Marcion. Once they
we didn't have the printing press till 1500.
Didn't say we had the printing press.
Write down.
Didn't say we had the printing press. But they got the idea to collect these letters and these books.
Ain't that who did the printing press? Johann Gutenberg.
They got that idea from Marcion, and we're talking about the 2nd century now. Up till then, up to the time of Paul,
and the first thing they print was the Bible.
It never occurred to anybody to put these writings together. So when you say these guys were writing their gospels for different audiences, yeah, that's true. But that's true of dozens of gospels. And
because they were not intended to be a part of a collective.
He was a Jewish writer aiming for a Jewish community. Luke was a Gentile writer aiming for Gentiles. It wasn't like they were sorting out themselves to target, and we'd have all 4, and that would cover our target audience. No, every single one of them was writing the one true gospel. Luke even is right out of the gate says, so many people are writing gospels, I'm going to give you the true story. And then he besmirches his own sources, Matthew, Mark, and everybody else who's writing. And again, these are just the gospels that made the cut. They aren't including all the gospels we know about, and that's only including all the gospels that have survived to the day. So there's a world of Christian writings out there, early Christian writings, that never made it.
Well, we could start with. A lot of people don't know the history of the early Christian church.
You were preaching to the choir.
300 years. For the first 300 years of Christianity, it was considered a cult.
Absolutely. And
the fucking
these men sacrificed their lives.
Serapis Christus was the first fucking cult. The Coptic Egyptians.
Because Josephus recorded that James
There you go, back to Flavian.
He records that a guy named James died, but if you've read my book Nailed, you'll know that that James is not the James that we think of as the leader of the Jerusalem church. That's a completely different James altogether.
We also found an artifact.
That's James the Just. It's not our Jesus. In fact, you only have to read the passage in Josephus to see that that's the case. That the James in that passage and the Jesus in that passage is James the Just and Jesus son of Damnius, the brother of the high priest. It's not that should be a no-brainer by this point, because you just have to read it to know that.
We have 24,000 copies of the New Testament.
You know, we could have 24 million copies, and it wouldn't make any difference, because those 24,000 copies you're talking about are from the 12th century, 8th century, 10th century.
They're not really. They're copies of copies of copies of translations of translations of copies of translations of oral traditions.
How many textual traditions do we have? When you start going back to that, what do we have from the 3rd century? What do we have from the 2nd century? What do we have from the 1st century? We have nothing at all from the 1st century. We have nothing but scraps for the majority of the 2nd century. We don't have complete books of the New Testament until the very end of the 2nd century. We don't have complete New Testaments until the 4th century. So there's a huge blackout period for the first 150 to 250 years of Christianity where we don't know if what we have matches the originals. we have no way of knowing if it matches the originals. And here's the thing. Let's say somebody put the original in a vault and it magically has been undisturbed until just now. If we found that manuscript and had it in our hands right now, we wouldn't know it was the original. We'd say, well, here's a weird heretical gospel.
Well, we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, which proved the book of Isaiah was accurate.
Sorry. Yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls do talk about Isaiah. Yep. And they also...
At least one book.
Well, and when you say accurate, Isaiah was written by two different people over two different times. And we can see that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, too. And I don't know what it has to do with the New Testament, but there you go.
But we can trace all the New Testament books back to Jesus' inner circle.
No, we can't. No, we can't.
Yes, we can. If you look at Matthew, he was a tax collector. He talked about the temple tax in Matthew 17. He talked about the unforgiven servant in Matthew 18. And in Matthew 20, he talked about the parable of the workers in the vine.
And where did any of the Gospels that says this was written by Matthew?
Some strange God.
Where does it say anywhere in the Gospel that this was written by Matthew? And we should say Matthew Levi because hang on a second. We should say Matthew Levi because in one Gospel he's Matthew the tax collector, and the other one he's Levi, and it's been put together as Matthew Levi. But in the separate Gospels, they're two separate characters. And in fact, there's no, when you take out all the apostles, including the ones who are evangelists, there is no single Christian document, full stop, that agrees on who the apostles were. Not a single one. They're all put together by slapping together the four Gospels we like, and then saying, well, this guy must have had 2 or 3 names, and doing it from there. You mentioned the leaders of the Jerusalem church, and I wanted to come back to that because, yeah, we do have the leaders of the Jerusalem church, and you didn't answer my question. What does Paul say about those guys? Everyone says, in Galatians he says that James is the brother of the Lord. He's Jesus' brother. Well, no, he's not Jesus' brother. He's the brother of the Lord. And what does Paul say about him? He says all those guys are false Christians. He doesn't agree with them for a minute. The whole book of Galatians, the letter of Galatians, is talking about his run-in with these guys, who he calls false Christians. How do you talk about Jesus' friends and family like this? It seems like all the arguments you're making are, well, the gospel says this, and therefore we know that. But you're not saying, well, who wrote these gospels? How do we know that Matthew wrote this gospel called Matthew? Because the gospel of Matthew doesn't say that Matthew, wrote this. In fact, it says things like, and this story was told around, and the Jews believe it to this day. All the Gospels have giveaways that there's anachronisms that they're writing long after the time they admit that the story is set in. It's like you're trying to say, well, Gandalf said that Frodo had the One Ring, so we know that was true.
Well, we know the Gospel of Matthew is correct because the massacre of the innocents, when Herod did that, when we look at sources outside of the Bible, it proves that he killed his own kids and one of his wives.
Well, he definitely killed his own kids and one of his wives, but we don't have we have no corroboration for the massacre of the innocents. And that's a very weird thing to leave out because the same guys who told us that he killed his wife and his sons, they loved picking dirt on Herod the Great. They would have no way they would have missed something like, and he just happened to massacre all the boys born in Bethlehem for over 2 years. And honestly, if he did that, well, then how did John the Baptist survive? Because he was born around then too. But anyway, the point is, you say these things have historical corroboration. You can't point to the same book and say they have historical corroboration. And when you look at the corroboration, what they're corroborating is not what you say they are.
Tacitus mentions Jesus' crucifixion.
He mentions that Christians worship a guy that was crucified, and I think you're mentioning I think you're thinking of Suetonius too. But all these guys, and I go through all these alleged witnesses in my book Nailed. In every single case, we're talking about 2nd and 3rd century figures talking about Christians and what Christians are saying. And Bart Ehrman, who's he's with you that there was a real Jesus. Even he says, and he's talking about the Josephus testimonium in particular, he says, you know what, even if every word of this is true, and we know it's not because it's a forgery, it doesn't add anything to the question because this is nothing except what Christians were saying any Christian on the street was saying. We know Tacitus wasn't going through the library to look up this stuff because he's not talking about Christians. He's talking about something else and just mentioning it to explain, okay, Christians, I should explain what these are because you've never heard of them. They worship this crucified guy, blah, blah, blah. Some of your fellow Christian apologists bring out eyewitnesses that if they read these supposed eyewitnesses, not only would they see that these are not eyewitnesses, often they're not even saying what you think they're saying, and they're saying things about Christianity that does not make early Christianity look good. And I'm thinking of Lucian of Samosata. They say, oh, well, he mentions that Jesus was crucified. Yeah, he's a 4th century, 3rd century Jerry Seinfeld talking about how gullible the Christians are, and that how his friend Proteus, Peregrinus, wrote Christian scriptures, and they all fell for it. It's like, keep reading what these witnesses to what you're saying. So.
I'm going to have to insert here that we do have other callers on the line, but Andrew has not gotten much talk time. Oh. So what I'd like to do...
Well, I just want to say, and Andrew, if you want to talk more about this offline...
Let's finish off with it.
Well, if you want to talk more about this offline, please...
Well, that's what I was going to suggest.
Can I just get a couple of things here? I just want to ask one question.
I've talked a lot over him, sure.
Does he believe the Roman Emperor Tiberius existed?
Duh. Why would I not believe that? Let me put it this way. We have good lines of evidence that indicate Tiberius existed.
But we only have 10 historians that recognize him within the one.
That's not all we have. And we have even if that was the only written evidence we have, that's not the only evidence we have.
If Jesus was just a carpenter from Nazareth, why do we have 42 independent sources that recognize his identity?
Short answer, we don't. Long answer, because they started a religion about it. But those 42 witnesses that you're lined up, none of them are from his life. None of them are from the 1st century. Almost all of them are up to fact, and almost all of them are Christian.
All right, I'm grabbing the reins here, okay. And I'm going to say, would you...
Can I just ask him one more question?
No, because then he'll give you an answer.
You can just give me a quick...
Wait. Please let me just insert my solution here so that we can move on to another call. What I was going to do is ask David, would you be amenable to engaging at our blog with the people who might have questions for you about the conversations today?
It would be my happy privilege to do that.
Okay, so Andrew, you can ask David questions at the blog. I'm going to just warn people.
And everyone can see it on the blog?
Yeah, it's going to be visible on the blog. So Andrew, you're welcome to come. There's an open show thread at the Atheist Experience blog that will be specifically for this show. You can go and post your questions to David, and David has agreed to answer them. And I will let you know that if you have not posted to our blog before, the first comment that you post has to be moderated, so there may be a delay. So if you go to post and you don't see your post immediately appear, it's just because it needs moderation. When someone goes in and moderates it, then you will be able to post freely after that. Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay.
Does he believe Alexander the Great existed?
We've got good evidence for it.
This is more of the same.
We don't have any evidence of his life until 200 years after his death.
That's adorable. That is adorable, Andrew.
Okay, Andrew, please post it at the blog, and David, please respond to him at the blog.
I promise I will. And I won't even be snarky about it. Okay. I won't even be snarky.
All right, and I didn't want to hang up on Andrew. I felt that Andrew was actually a polite caller. He was actually okay. This can't go on because it will be endless. So
this is my life. This is my life. Yes.
So then
down the rabbit hole we go.
What about this guy? What about that guy? And it's like, so what he's saying is, in the Avengers movies, they're in Africa and they're in the United States and New York and Jersey or wherever. So that has to mean that, Captain America is real and that Iron Man is real because they're in real cities with real people. And it's like, no. Just because the Bible does have historical figures that we can, piece together enough evidence to say, hey, this was a real person. That doesn't mean, like, everything else in the fucking Bible is real, yo. Like, New York is a real place. That doesn't mean Spider-Man is real though. Like, just I don't know. What about this guy? Do you believe in Pontius Pilate? Do you believe in Josephus Flavian? Like, yeah, all these guys are real. Doesn't mean that Jesus was real. That's the only thing. And there was probably a real guy named Saint Nicholas, old Saint Nick. Does that mean that Santa Claus is real? No.
Sorry for the mispronunciation.
That's okay. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Okay.
What do you got for us?
Well, I wanted to get your opinion on something. I've heard a lot from atheists that, unlike people of belief, people of religion who have a certain thing that they believe in, whether it's God or other tenets of faith, the atheist often says, well, I actually don't have anything to believe in because there's no good evidence. I have my
That's a lie.
So I don't have to really offer any substantiation or evidence from my point of view. And so I've heard this a lot, that the onus or the burden of proof always on the believer.
The way you phrased it is kind of one of those things that we hear quite often where atheists have nothing to believe in. That's not true. Atheists believe in all sorts of things. I believe in pretty much, probably most of the things that you believe in, with the exception of God. What you're talking about is on the subject of belief in gods, do atheists have some burden of proof?
Right.
Yeah, the answer is no. And that's because atheism and theism aren't positions God exists, or theism isn't God exists, and atheism isn't no God exists. They are both positions on the proposition that a God exists, and theists accept that proposition is true, and atheists reject that proposition is true. It is a complete failure of an understanding of the burden of proof to expect atheists to demonstrate that a God doesn't exist. It's the same reason why in a courtroom the onus is on the prosecution. And so you can really view this as the prosecution has claimed that a God exists, and I'm finding that God not guilty of existing. I don't know for sure if that God is completely innocent of existing. I can't know that. That would be the null hypothesis, the thing that could never actually be demonstrated. And so my vote is not guilty.
Okay. Well, my opinion on this is that atheists do in fact have some burden of proof. Because by virtue of saying that, I don't believe in God, in some sense you're saying that I'm going to take the position that there is no God.
No, you don't have to do that.
You're practically
Did
saying
you not
that.
practically hear the courtroom analogy? Do you think that the defense has a burden of proof?
Well, no, I mean, the way the legal system is set up is that you are innocent until proven guilty.
Right, and the way we evaluate existential claims is that nothing exists until it's demonstrated to exist.
Well, I mean, generally speaking, but there are times
Generally speaking.
you have to assume that something exists, even if you don't have good evidence.
No. Why would you ever do that?
Only because the alternative also becomes less believable. Now, in the case of atheism,
Can you give an example of this?
There is no God.
Can you give an example of this wild-ass assertion you just made?
Okay,
that is,
I will, and I'll give an example when it comes to theism. If you're going to say that there is potentially, now there are two possibilities, right? There either is God or there isn't, correct?
Correct.
So one of those two has to be true.
Correct.
So if you're going to say, well, I think it's more likely that there is no God, because as an atheist, that's what you're saying. You're saying it's more likely that there is no God.
No.
Correct?
No.
No?
No.
We haven't had proof that there is a God. Just proof.
What we're
Nobody's
saying is
proven
that
there is a God.
we don't believe.
I understand, but which is more likely in your point of view?
What I'm saying is that you haven't presented evidence sufficient for me to accept your claim that a God exists.
It may be the case.
If you do, I
Well,
will
that's fine.
believe.
I haven't tried to prove that God exists. I'm simply asking you
then.
what you think is more likely.
The answer is, I don't know. It may be the case that we can't determine which one is more likely. However, if you'd like somebody to defend the case for anti-theism, the position that it's more likely that a God doesn't exist, that can be done too, and I'm happy to do it, but that isn't atheism, and it's not anything that I'm required to do. And I'm very reluctant to allow people to shift the burden of proof, because it is theism that has that burden of proof, because they are making an assertion that the proposition some God exists is true.
But I think you're making that assertion right now to say that the burden of proof is on the theist.
Okay, look, I'm not going to argue. No. Stop.
That are mutually exclusive.
Stop.
And if we're going to
stop, you listen to me. There are two possibilities: a God exists or no God exists.
Right.
That is about what is actually true. Theism and atheism both address only this one proposition. It is what is your belief about this proposition, much in the same way that the defendant is actually guilty or innocent, but we only address the question of guilt. And you either believe that the defendant is guilty or you do not believe that the defendant is guilty. And saying that you do not believe the defendant is guilty does not mean that you believe the defendant is innocent, and it does not mean that you have made any kind of statement about which is more likely. It means that you have not been convinced of the burden of proof that is on the actual claim. That's it.
Can I discuss that example then that you bring up?
Sure.
All right, so if you have someone who's convicted or accused of a crime, and you would like to take the position that he's innocent until proven guilty. Okay, fine. The burden of proof is on the accuser. And if at the end of the day there isn't strong evidence that the person committed the crime, then you have to take the position, the opposite position, that the person is innocent.
No,
you don't.
No. That's how it works.
No, it's not how it works. The O.J. Simpson trial. Did O.J. kill them people? More than likely he did. Did everybody believe that he killed them people? More than likely they did. Did they have proof? They did not. So he was not guilty, but they did not believe he was innocent either. Just because you can't find someone guilty doesn't mean you have to think that they're innocent. God is not guilty of existing.
Not how it works.
You're 100% sure.
No, that is not how it works.
Innocent.
No, our courts are not set up to evaluate whether someone is innocent or not. We only evaluate whether someone is guilty or not.
Okay, fine.
If someone is,
I'll change my language. Let's just say you take the position that they're not guilty.
Right.
There you go.
So, but practically speaking,
practically, no.
We don't know.
We don't know.
And so, which is more likely?
We don't know.
We don't know.
You have no idea?
The verdict, no.
Well, you first of all, you're talking about an abstract case, so obviously I have no idea.
Okay, the
But
verdict.
You have no idea.
No, listen to me. The verdict addresses whether the evidence that's presented is sufficient to support a guilty claim. If it is, then you vote guilty. If it isn't, you vote not guilty.
You are making.
You do not determine that someone is innocent.
Then, you'd like to extend the same standard of you have to prove something beyond the shadow of a doubt.
No.
Accept that, right?
No, your ass is on hold again. No, please stop putting words in our mouth and please stop spinning off in another direction. Nobody said anything about what the standard of evidence needs to be. Nobody said anything about to an absolute certainty or beyond any reasonable doubt or anything. So don't start.
You can't extend a courtroom standard to the standard.
Are you aware that there are multiple courtroom standards, that there is to a preponderance of the evidence beyond all reasonable doubt? Are you aware that there's multiple standards in a courtroom?
Okay, well, if you want to take that standard, then beyond reasonable doubt, reasonable, that's...
No, you idiot. I have not said any standard. You brought up the standard. I'm saying don't. The standard is the part of the conversation we haven't even got to, because you are making the gross error of trying to address two prongs of a dilemma simultaneously. You address one. Do you know what a null hypothesis is?
Do you understand why we have a null hypothesis? The null hypothesis, by definition, can never be proven.
Can I say something?
I don't know.
Well, first of all, I do see your point. You're making the point that you haven't discussed the actual standard yet, but simply as to who has the burden of proof. I stand corrected, and I do accept your point there. However, what I'm trying to say is an atheist does also have a belief.
I have lots of beliefs.
Yeah.
No, regarding God.
Do I? How do you know? How do you know that an atheist has a belief regarding God? Well, I tell you what my belief is regarding God. My belief is that the theists have not met their burden of proof.
All right. Well, first of all, why do I have to have a burden of proof anyway?
We just had this conversation.
No, but let's just take a step back. Why?
Because you're asserting that a God exists.
I'm not trying to convince you that God exists. By the
Okay,
way.
then why did you call?
Yeah.
No, I'm just simply challenging you as an atheist because I hear so many atheists think that, the standard position is that there is no God.
Correct.
Whoever.
That is the default.
Well, that is incorrect. That is
No, that is not.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Would you let me finish? I misspoke when I responded too quickly. The default position is to disbelieve the claim that a God exists. That's true, whether you're talking about gods, fairies, Loch Ness monsters, or whatever. The default position is not to believe something until there is sufficient evidence for it.
Okay. However, in your default position that you claim,
there is no
you do believe something, and you believe.
No.
I do. I do.
You believe
I do.
that the universe is possible without a creator. You believe
no.
that the first living cell can come about without some force or entity designing it.
No, you don't even have to go there.
No. Oh, for Christ's sake.
I was saying no because I knew he was going there.
He's on hold. I didn't hang up on him. I wanted to let you finish.
No, all of these other things that you're bootstrapping on to a rejection of your claim that a God exists are completely irrelevant to the claim. This is basic logic 101. If you assert that something exists, you bear the burden of proof of demonstrating that that thing that you assert exists. I bear no burden of proof, and I am perfectly justified in rejecting your claim until you've met your burden.
The stuff that you're trying to attach to this is roughly like saying, oh, well, if you vote not guilty on the defendant, then you actually believe that it's possible that somebody else committed the crime. Well, yeah, I guess so.
True.
But that's not anything that I have to demonstrate is actually true, because that you're attempting by 5 different methods here to shift the burden of proof away.
I'm not saying you have to demonstrate that someone else is guilty, but you have to at the very least acknowledge that by saying this person is guilty, then chances are, or it's possible, that someone else is guilty. So when you say that, I don't know if God exists, I'm gonna assume he doesn't, or act like or live my life as if he doesn't, then you're opening up all these other possibilities that also are unsupported and are not default positions.
It doesn't matter to the question of whether or not a God exists. That is just another way of attempting to shift the burden of proof. But, as I said, if you want a defense of the anti-theistic position, I'd point out that there have been thousands and thousands and thousands of gods that people have posited, and pretty much everybody rejects all of them except for the one that they cling to. Now, did they have to go around demonstrating that all these other gods were false? No.
No,
Did they have to demonstrate
other gods or multiple gods? They often believe for the standard reasons that people have a certain religion.
Yeah, they don't understand the burden of proof. They don't understand the nature of evidence. They don't understand.
I totally agree with you.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that you can't distinguish between the different gods and give supporting arguments for one conception over another.
Sure, and there's been lots of arguments for the various different gods posited. And
I think
none of
they're all
them
weak except for the belief in a transcendent monotheistic God. I think everything else fails.
And I think that one fails as well.
Yeah.
Would you like to defend that transcendent monotheistic God, or are you just in the business of trying to shirk off the burden of proof?
No, I don't shirk off anything. I'll give you my evidence. And basically it's 2 major arguments. One is the argument from design, and one is the cosmological argument.
Mm-hmm.
So to explain life, especially the first living cell, which is so intricately complex, to just imagine that can evolve randomly from this organic soup unguided is ludicrous.
That's called an argument from ignorance fallacy.
No, it's not.
Yes,
it is.
It actually
this is a probabilistic argument.
No, it's not,
No.
because
Yeah,
no, it's not.
absolutely.
No, it's not, because you can't possibly have any data. This is something you can't investigate. You can't determine what the probability of this actually is. You don't have sufficient. You don't have sufficient information to come up with the probability. All you're doing is saying that when I look at all of this, it just seems so improbable without a God. But the God is a magic panacea. Of course it can be used as an explanation for anything. It is used as a cover for ignorance. It is, we don't know how this happened, so I'm going to stick a God in here, and it makes everything work.
No, it's not.
Yes, it absolutely does, because you can also stick in magic does it, and you end up with the exact...
No. It's totally different. It's like a forensic pathologist looking at a deceased person.
No, it's not, because a forensic pathologist has other information. You have exactly one universe, and you cannot go back in time.
What was that?
A forensic pathologist has a large body, a collection of bodies, some of them large, with which to pull together information and a history of information with which to determine the probability of something. They can determine the probability of certain outcomes because we have many, many trials. We have many, many points of data. You have exactly one universe, and you know of one planet on which life exists. You do not have the data set to determine the probability.
But actually we can determine probability, and that's because we know all the different components of a living cell.
No, you don't. No, you don't know everything. You don't know what it was like in the past. You don't know everything that's actually required. And the scientists that have spent time actually studying this and demonstrating that it's possible for the building blocks of life to arise from purely naturalistic from purely naturalistic causes disagree with you. So why haven't you gone out and got a Nobel Prize to solve this?
You know for a fact, and I do, that the most brilliant scientific minds these days cannot, in a laboratory, put together a cell from the known building blocks. You cannot synthesize a cell. How does that happen?
Which is absolutely irrelevant, because that's not how cells arise. Our inability to reproduce something has no bearing on the discussion at all. That's like, and plus you're doing it as if we are now at the pinnacle of scientific knowledge. What if we're not at the pinnacle of scientific knowledge, which I'd argue that we're not? That's like saying that only God can make a baby. There's no way for a sperm to get inside an egg cell other than God. Well, guess what? We got lots and lots of ways of doing it now. You're starting.
You very well know that a building cannot be built by itself or a
correct.
Yes. You can't just throw parts together.
Correct. But do you know how?
You can't do
correct.
that. It doesn't happen that way. It's
correct.
Improbable.
Correct. It's not just improbable. I'd go so far as to say that it is practically impossible. Do you know why? Do you know how you recognize that a building was built? Because we have evidence of buildings being built. Because all of the evidence that we have shows certain structures are built, and we have no evidence that these structures arise on their own. We also have no evidence that these structures have any mechanism for self-replication, which does not apply to life.
Matt, here's the key. Here's the key with this with recognizing design. It's that if you see it, you know it's there. You don't.
Wrong. You recognize design not because of complexity, and not because you see it. You recognize design by contrasting it with nature. X occurs naturally. Y does not occur naturally. Y is recognized as designed. All this recognition is by contrast. Everything that we do is comparative. And so we recognize design by contrasting it with what is naturally occurring. And life is naturally occurring.
Matt, I think you very well know that design is very recognizable, and it's only because you don't want to see the argument, you want to refuse it, that you deny certain things.
No. And thank you for implying that I'm being dishonest. Let me tell you what's actually happening. What happens is I understand that people see design all over the place where there's no design, where there's no intellect behind it. We are programmed to see design because it's evolutionary beneficial. I don't not see design because I'm trying to avoid an argument. I see design, and I see people who are so enamored of this idea of, oh, we just see design everywhere. You're so infatuated with your intuition and the fact that it is most often right. We live our lives by induction and inference, and it is great because today is pretty much the same as yesterday, and the things that we recognize and deal with today is pretty much similar to what we've dealt with in the past. And this is a great way to go about things, except for when it fails. And that is that inductive reasoning and inference lead us to become overly infatuated with our ability to spot things, and you don't know why you spot them. Matter of fact, your claim is that we just recognize design, we just intuit design, we just feel design. No, we don't. We recognize design for reasons, and if you investigate, you can figure out what those reasons actually are.
I think you've sort of lost me there with that last part, to be honest.
Okay.
Speaking of panacea, when you say, oh, we were evolved to think this way or to recognize design, I think that's just an assertion. That's baseless, to be honest.
So, actually, we have pretty good evidence that
yeah, I mean,
we've evolved
are you like
as pattern-seeking?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
humans like patterns.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I assume
we like patterns. It's just some weird thing. It helps us keep things in order. We can organize shit better, so we look for patterns and designs. And we seek out patterns and designs. It is an evolutionary trait. And so some people can see design in anything where there isn't a designer there. It's just, that's fucking nature, bro. Nobody designed that. You know, it just does that by itself. But I don't know. Some of these callers are just lost in the sauce. Starting to get hungry now. Gotta go cook. I got me a little fryer hen. I'm about to stuff that bad boy on top of a can of beer. I'm trying to see if I got enough energy to light the charcoals on fire. And smell like smoke all evening. Or if I'm just gonna put it in the oven. Honestly, I might just pop that thing in the oven. So I ain't gotta watch the coals. Because while it's baking in the oven, I can play the PlayStation. I mean, I can read a book. I'll read a chapter out of my book. Then I'll play the PlayStation. So this is a commission for a good friend of mine. Known this guy about 12 years, 13 years, something like that. And back when I was making music, when I was a rapper, you know, always been an artist, always. If I was making music or whatever, you know. But he's a producer for a group of guys. I used to deal around with making music, and even after we stopped the music, still kind of kept in contact with each other. So he always told me, he was like, "Trap, one day I'll get you to paint a picture for me." Me and my man was talking the other day. He's like, "Yo, today's the day." And what are you talking about, man? Boy, I'm ready for that paint. Say word. And so he has me doing this painting of his beautiful little daughter. She's a lot older now, but he just wants this baby painting, this baby picture painted. and these long days and all the daylight just really fools me because I swear I know it's way later, but it feels like it's like 3. It feels like it's like 3ish, 4, maybe something like that. This might not be way later, but I know it has to be out there like 3:30, 4 o'clock by now. But it's just looking out the window and it's still, it's so bright outside. What time is it, guys? It's like 6 o'clock yet? It'll probably take me about an hour to put that dinner together. Well, an hour from start to, I don't know, probably about an hour and 30 minutes from start to the time I'm eating. I could whip up some shit fast, man. You know what I'm saying? Shit, slap that meat down, throw some seasonings on it, rub some butter. You know what I'm saying? Popping open a can of this, put that in the pot, boom. And all you gotta do is wait, then. Still can't see how some people can't cook, man. Look, I ain't trying to say be Chef Ramsay's, you know what I'm saying, and nothing like that, but it ain't nothing but beer chicken, some beer baked chicken. You open the can, you season your chicken, you open the can of beer, you stick the chicken on the can of beer, put that shit in the oven. Damn, man, that shit delicious. So simple, so easy. 45 minutes, juicy chicken. That yard bird. You know I love that yard bird. Yardbird. I'm gonna start me a rock band called Yardbird. You know what I'm saying? It's gonna be like a screamo rap type thing with a Jamaican flavor to it, you know. Yardbird. I just finished one commission. Got this commission right now, and then I'm waiting on a photo from a photographer so I can start another commission. Man, hey, your boy kind of busy lately. I appreciate all the business. You can't be busy without business. You know what I'm saying? So Travis, what are you doing during this quarantine time? I'm working, motherfuckers. I'm still working. Ain't shit changed, man. Hey, man. Making art, baby. What you doing? Sitting around gaining weight. I bet you is sitting around gaining weight. Ay, 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 ay. Oh, YouTube. I'm on Facebook too, yo. YouTube, say what's up to Facebook. Facebook, say what's up to YouTube. How long we been in here? Almost 2 hours. Got a little bit done with the shirt. Been working on the shirt for a couple hours. Oh, what's underneath it is it's a box or a book. Cause I can jack the easel up some more. I still got hella height on the easel, but the ceiling is so low in here. Like I can't really jack it up much higher than that. So if I want the canvas to go up, I have to prop something underneath the canvas on the easel to get some extra height on it. Which isn't bad, and I have several easels, so if I really need it to go higher than that, or if I'm working on a taller project, I'll just swap this easel out. Use a different one, or use this little French travel easel if I need to. But, didn't realize how many people were watching. Sorry guys for missing some of the comments and stuff. Even on YouTube, we're live on YouTube right now. Got a couple people in here watching the art get made. But yeah. So just trying to work around that what they call that shit, a watermark or whatever. Screw that watermark. So just trying to get the first layer of paint down. I was going to finish the skin tone and work on her hands, but I figured I better do that shirt underneath it first. It'll come out a little bit better. So I'll just try to finish filling in the yellow here, and then after I get that filled in, I might do the whole background first, because it's fairly simple. I might even make the white part look like clouds or I don't know, something. But get all the background filled in first and then come back and work on her hands. We'll see. Yo, Monica, you see who's in here? Always in the studio with me. So, I got a couple of personal pieces that are put on the side right now. I got 2 pieces for the Rita series over here that are kind of taking a back seat. And this was the second piece to go along with that painting. And they're taking a back seat right now until I can wrap up some of these other commissions. Appreciate y'all guys watching. I'll kick it with y'all next time. I'm about to go put my dinner together. Peace. It's almost 6 o'clock. You know, sorry I missed the comments. Like I said, trying to do a dual stream. I'll be more focused next time. Tomorrow's Monday. Got to go back to work. Probably can I don't know, cause I gotta do something right after work tomorrow. I'm still gonna try to stream tomorrow though. Well, anyway. It's not looking too bad. Alright guys, I'm about to go get my dinner together and probably play some video games while I do it. Let's see what I need out of here. Oh damn, I still had a little sippy sip. That's pretty damn good. Take this with me. Okay, that light is out. Turn off this laptop. Hey man, y'all need to come watch me play video games, man. I be needing encouragement on that shit too. All y'all need to download that free Call of Duty, man. So all us can play some Call of Duty together. I get tired of playing by myself, man. I ain't got no real friends, man. You know, especially nobody to with no more. Brightness. Never. Alright, so what's for dinner? Like I said, I got like a little chicken fryer, a fryer hen. Pop that bitch in the oven. And then I might just put a salad on the side. I ain't gonna lie, it's something easy. Chop up some lettuce, dice some tomatoes, a cucumber, a mushroom, sprinkle some cheese, throw in some croutons, and some of those little crispy fried onions, and some fried jalapenos. Oh, and I got strawberries. I might dice some strawberries and put in that bitch too. I might just bake the fucking chicken and make a salad, and then take some of the chicken and take that shit off the bone and just throw that shit on top of my salad. Then I have a chicken salad. That's how I might actually do that shit, yo. Either way, it's gonna be delicious. I ain't really going nowhere. I'm just going downstairs to turn on the other PlayStation. I see y'all in the living room. Hit the wrong button.